Hello and welcome to Share.care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Hello, Catherine. How are you?
Hi, good, thanks.
Good to see you again. It's been a little while since we've had a chat.
Yeah.
And you're keeping... Thank you. And you're keeping busy. We're talking about in the pre-show that there's some teacher strikes, and you've got two little boys running around at home that you've got to take care of as well as trying to work.
Yeah, it's been a bit interesting.
And when parenting doesn't stop, does it? For the audience, I was going to say for the readers there, for the audience, who we have here is Catherine, and she's a specialist in CliftonStrengths. Sorry, for the audience, we've got Catherine Gray. I'm having a bit of fun here, and I'm allowed to because I'm the host. And I made a mistake, and I'm going to own that mistake. And my show notes, as I'm reading it verbatim, it just says Catherine. I went, Catherine, hang on a minute, it's Catherine Gray. So we have Catherine Gray, who's a specialist in CliftonStrengths, positive intelligence, and finding your calling. She's passionate about helping people be aligned to their strengths and gifts. So after all that, Catherine, and my bumbling, which I'm going to own completely, because I think we should own that rather than be plastic in the world. When we're looking at the world now, there's a number of discussions about men being lost, about them feeling lonely, about not feeling useful in society. I mean, from your perspective, what have you seen in that regard? I mean, have you seen some issues with that being talked about, and what's your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, isn't it?
It is.
I think it's different, maybe, in different areas of my life. So I've been married for 20 years, to someone who I think is probably very open with me and would not class himself as lost. But I do find it interesting every now and then just going, when I've got stuff going on, I phone lots of people, or I sort out a load of coffee meetups, and I do a load of stuff to kind of look after myself. And that wouldn't necessarily be what I watch happen in my husband's life, but I don't think he's necessarily not looking after himself either. So that's my initial observation of kind of like the stuff closest to me, which potentially is just a difference in approach. But I wonder whether we also have quite a good support system around us, and if that was someone else that I was watching who I didn't know so well and who didn't have a good support system, I think I would be thinking, are you okay? What's going on? But again, that's coming through the lens of someone who loves hanging out with their friends, and I like talking quite a lot. And I guess I just find it absolutely fascinating, like how much of this stuff comes down to a personality thing or well-being, like just an individual well-being aspect. Like it's just so different for every different person, isn't it? And I'm really, even when I find something new and exciting that I want to tell everyone about, I'm the first person to say, like, this isn't going to fix it for everyone. Like, we all need to figure out what it actually is for ourselves.
I like
Yeah.
that point that you made. We need to figure out what it is for ourselves, because there's a lot of talk out there that, you know, men need to show more emotion, and, you know, they need to cry. And so I look at that, and, you know, from my perspective, as you mentioned about your husband, you said you like to talk, but your husband, I'm guessing from what you were saying, doesn't like to talk so much. He doesn't solve through his problems through talking. And I relate. I'm relating that to my own experience, where I probably don't talk so much about it. I do what I now call gumping, forest gumping, where I have my lawnmower and I go outside. I have a big lawn, and I go outside. And sometimes, even if it doesn't need mowing, I'll just go out there and mow the lawn because that's my space where I can think through things and work that out. And sometimes I mean, I had that a couple of days ago where I just was flat out for several days, like full on. I was on an interview at until 1:30 in the morning. Then I had to be up for another interview that I was conducting at 6:30 a.m. So I had very little sleep. Then I had another one at 9:30, and then I was doing broadcasts for the radio station later in the afternoon. By the time I got home, and which I stayed away and then got home the next day, I just needed space, and I went outside and I mowed the lawn, and I dug up some garden, and I stayed outside for probably about 7 hours by myself, just because I needed that space. Is that, like, when you look at your husband, is that a sort of similar thing, or is it expected now that guys should actually talk things through like women, or do we have to find our own way of doing it?
So I think what we figured out for me and my husband is that he'll talk once he's figured out a load of answers in his head. And until he knows, like until he's got to a certain point where he's analysed a load of stuff and figured a load of stuff out, he wouldn't really think to say that out loud to anyone, because it's not part of that initial process. Whereas for me, I kind of go around finding sounding boards for everything.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, because I'm not like an external processor, and I'm quite introverted, and yet when there's something going on that I know is stuck in my head, I will say it out loud to as many people as possible to see reactions. And it's basically the opposite of what my husband would do in that figuring out process. So that's just something that we've learned about each other along the way. And the whole thing about crying, I find that really interesting, because again, like in our house, I think my husband used to think that I cried quite a lot, whereas I thought, compared to some of my friends, I'm not the crier. Like, some of my friends cry multiple times a day, and if they don't, they're like, oh gosh, what's happened? Like, why? What's gone on? And so then in my head, I automatically count as the person who doesn't cry very much. I've also got a lot of female friends who don't know when they last cried and are a bit worried for when it next happens, in case it doesn't stop, in case there's like a backlog.
Yes.
And I also have male friends who they count themselves as the crier, and they're like, oh gosh, like if I get through a big meeting without crying, then that's a big deal.
Yeah.
So again, I think
they're okay talking about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, I don't necessarily see that as a gender thing necessarily, because I know enough people who would talk about it anyway. And I know quite a lot of women who, I'd probably be thinking, oh, do you need a good cry? Because I don't know when, none of us know when that last happened. But equally, it depends what that cry is a release of, doesn't it? Because
that's a good point.
If it's to do with kind of a grief or a loss thing, it probably bubbles up from someone when you're not expecting it, and you don't know when and how that's going to happen and how useful that is to you, and you just kind of have to ride it. If it's a kind of emotional reaction to something else, I think we can teach ourselves to turn that on and off a little bit. And you can't say that it's useful to everyone.
No.
So I think, I'm trying to catch up with where my thinking was going with that then, because I do think that crying is a good thing,
Yeah.
but I don't think I could ever say, "Oh gosh, we haven't cried in 2 months. There's definitely a problem." Like,
Mm.
yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, it sounds like it's more about, and from your experience, from what you're seeing, is that people do have the ability to, if that's how they deal with things, they have the ability to do that. Um, and there are people, well, from what we're told, there are people out there that have that problem. And I know I've listened to some men talk, some older men talk, that they didn't have that ability to ask for help, or to actually express emotions that they had building up. Um, and how we do that. And I said, from my perspective, it's gumping. That's how I deal with things. I go out there and push the lawnmower up and down, and 7 hours later, I'm fine and everything's okay, because it's just
Mm.
processed in my head. Um, and but some other people, they seem to, from what I understand, they build it up. From your experience in dealing with people in the work that you do, have you experienced that people, particularly men, having this thing where they're building up emotions or things that they need to release?
Um, that's a good question. So I think there's two things that come to mind. One is, if we talk in CliftonStrengths language, one of the
Mm,
talents that comes up in that assessment is empathy. And so
mm,
probably that's more widely known when people label themselves as empaths, basically.
right.
So you're feeling everything all the time, and you're feeling everyone else's stuff
Yeah.
all the time.
Yes.
And what I notice about that is, so I have several friends, male and female, who I think sometimes will get on the phone to me and say, "Oh gosh, I had a big wave of something, and I
Mm.
don't even know whether that was mine or just the person that I was near."
Oh,
So,
okay.
like, just feeling all over the place because I've picked up on something out there. And so I think that sometimes actually is kind of talent based, because there's a load of people walking around in the world who wouldn't have a clue what was going on with everyone around them, including the ones that they are really close to. Um, but it's when it kind of becomes overwhelming and all consuming that then it actually stops you from functioning
Mm,
yourself. So that's an interesting thing that you need to try and hone, I guess. And the other thing that was coming to mind is that I read a really interesting book last year called Running on Empty, which
mm,
was written by a psychologist who was seeing more and more people coming into sessions saying, "But I've got a brilliant life and I feel fine,
mm,
and I've got all these wonderful friends and a brilliant job and all these things, but I actually feel empty inside and I don't know what's going on."
mm,
And what she started to notice a pattern of was how you were taught, or what permission you were given growing up to show emotions or deal with hard circumstances, either let you express things or it just shut you down.
yeah.
And so I think there's the more my eyes are open to that, the more I'm coming across people who either don't realize that other people respect and kind of want to hear their opinion on anything, because that's not what they were taught when they were
Mm,
younger. They were taught to just do what you're told and get on with it, and to not speak up about anything that you think, or emotions are something that we're meant to just not really kind of comment on or play down.
mm,
And so it's more if people are wandering around like that and going, "Well, there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is because I had a wonderful childhood." Potentially there's stuff going on that actually we just didn't learn, that
mm.
our emotions can mean something else, and that it's not a bad thing to be emotional or to not know what something means for a while.
Yeah. 'Cause it sounds like, I mean, from the people that I've talked to, it really does sound like there's, um, because I guess I'm talking to people that are in this space. They like attracts like, so they're associating with people that are okay talking with it, from what talking about emotions and expressing
Mm,
feelings, that kind of thing. But from what you're saying, you're also noticing other people around that aren't okay with that. Is that what I'm hearing?
yeah, I think so. So I think as soon as I read that book and realised that it was a thing, I just started noticing things with clients and with friends, and it's things like not, or kind of people pleasing, or not being able to say yes or no when you really mean it, or not knowing how to look after yourself. And so I was really interested when, I don't know whether this has happened where you are as well, but we just had so much talk about well-being in the workplace last year. And I guess because it was our first kind of year without COVID completely hijacking everything, then there was all this talk about well-being. And I was getting more and more wound up internally, because I was just like, I'm not sure anyone really knows what that means anymore. We're just saying it. And like, and then everyone might reel off a nice list of stuff of like, well, make sure you go outside, and make sure you have a break, and make sure you book a fitness class or something. And I'm like, but what if that's not actually what that person needs?
Yes.
They're just now talking to their boss about whether they've got enough downtime, or whether they've got enough like people to speak to. And has anyone actually figured out what that is for them individually? The same with rest. They kind of go a bit together, don't they? Yeah. I was just like, everyone's saying rest, and I think they think that that's just turning Netflix on, and that's not rest. That's escapism. So is what, how do we find out what that actually means for us individually is more what I was becoming interested in, I think.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because we all need to find our own space, and I'm certainly not suggesting everyone go gumping, because it probably doesn't work for everybody, but it's what I found works for me. And it is, I guess, is a part of this framework of what is manly is identifying who you are, or who you think you are as a man. Is there a set definition? Because traditionally it used to be, if you go back, or however long you want to go back, but it was the man went to work, and that was his role. His role was to be the provider, and it was a fairly clear definition as to what that role was. But obviously now we've moved into a different world, and as we should, where we have a lot more opportunity. And it's great that men have, more opportunity. They can be, the person that stays at home and takes care of the family, and the other partner goes out, and earns the income. But does that, is that an adjustment that people need to make, do you think, where they've got to go, they've got to recognize that they need to then make that choice? It's not imposed on them. I put that in to give that an example, I look at my dad. And my dad worked in the same organization his entire life, from when he was 17 as an apprentice all the way through until he retired. Same organization, different jobs within that organization, but never changed. And partly because it wasn't expected, it was expected that you stay in the same company. Whereas my upbringing was, well, not my upbringing, but my experience is very different. I've lost count of how many different jobs I've had now in different companies I've worked for. And I wouldn't even attempt to try and calculate that. And that's normal for me. And for me, through that process, admittedly, when I first started doing it, I was avoiding things. So I'd do something because I was trying to avoid something else. And that's how I left school. I joined the army because I wanted to leave school. And then when I got to the army, I didn't want to be running around the army, so I became a chef, because that got me out of running around the army, and then ended up getting posted to the SAS. I got to do it anyway. So I was kind of running away until I worked out for myself what I wanted. This was right for me, and these were the right decisions for me. Have we moved to where now we have this unlimited choice, but we haven't been teaching people how to make a decision for themselves? Do we need to have those discussions?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So I was just thinking then, my family is quite similar. So I think my dad probably would have had the same job his whole working life had he not been made redundant a few times in a row. And then I got married quite young, as I said, and I think at that point, we had agreed, like, my husband will stay working so that I can stay at home with the kids until they're school age. And that was kind of, we hadn't talked about it in detail. We just thought, well, let's do that. That's what we want for our family. And then when I was pregnant with my first child, I think I did have a little freak out of like, is this actually okay? Like, is this actually what we want? And do I feel all right about this? And what on earth's going on, because it's quite a lot of pressure for him to suddenly have to provide everything. Yeah, so that was an interesting moment for me, I think. And then actually I did get back into work sooner than I expected to. But again, I think that's just a personality thing. And what I find interesting on the flip side of it, I hear, at least, I don't know if it's the same for you, but a lot of people who are first time mums almost having to justify being a stay-at-home mum now because they feel like that's a lesser role than the doing a bit of both. And yet the people who are doing a bit of both are not feeling like they're doing a good job of either because they're just doing half of both.
Yeah.
So it's a crazy like headspin. But what's interesting and how that's panned out in my household is that because we're both entrepreneurs, we're both regularly reviewing, like, right, where is it that you need to go, and therefore what do I need to be doing for that to happen, rather than someone's career or the kind of childcare element of stuff taking the lead. We've just kept kind of rejigging the whole way through, which I guess is quite a privileged place to be in. We've not had to, there's not been a job offer that we've had to basically kind of choose one person's way.
Yeah.
But what was I going to say after that? Yeah, it's a lot of pressure, isn't it, to just assume that you need to either be in a good enough position work-wise to suddenly provide for multiple people, or to assume that we all have the emotional kind of intelligence and resilience and everything to figure out how the heck do we prioritize everyone.
It's an interesting point that you talk about there, because as you said, you and your husband had decided that, for the first couple of years that you would stay home and he would work, but you mentioned that was a lot of pressure on him to have to provide for everybody. And that's one thing I suppose I hadn't really thought about too much, was back in the day, really, I mean, I don't know if that's a right term, back in the day, whether someone's going to jump on that and maybe that's not socially acceptable. But going back in time, it was almost, you got married fairly early, and therefore the woman didn't really. So it wasn't like you were both earning money to start with. You both had jobs, but now today both people will have jobs, and then when you actually, that's an interesting point that you raise. And when you have children, how do you balance that? Which is, yeah, it's an interesting discussion to have. Is it one of those things when we're talking about the framework, is men having the ability to talk about these things and having those discussions?
And also, so we, as part of being in a church community, we do some marriage preparation with people who are about to get married through our church. It's just kind of a little kind of thing that they put into the process. And we see a lot of people who are in their 20s who they are discussing, well, we both need to be in this position financially in order to even consider kids. Because how else would we figure that out? And it's almost like it becomes this big thing that both of your careers need to be at their best in order for you to even provide for children. And yet, being kind of 10 years on from there, I'm thinking, oh gosh, like, you've got more money now than you're ever going to have, like spare money. Like, and there isn't ever going to be a time where you wake up and go like, today we're financially ready. Like, I'm just not, unless you'd like won the lottery, which then probably, most people are then bankrupt 3 years later anyway, aren't they, from that? So like, I find it really interesting. And I probably, because I wasn't expecting to get married really young, and we kind of, that helped us, I think, almost to figure a load of stuff out because we're still growing up together. And so we went through all the different parts of like, oh, well, actually we're both students and there's not much money and we've no idea what we're doing with our lives. And then, we just kind of figured all that out as we went along, rather than coming to a position where we're just like, oh my gosh, everything needs to be reassessed because we're becoming this unit where we need to sort everything out together. Yeah.
It sounds like from your perspective, it was very cohesive to start with. There was a lot of discussion, or there was, well, some discussion anyway, whether it was a lot. It sounds like it was important discussion that was quite successful in working out how you were going to operate as a couple. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. So we got engaged when we were 18, and that freaked out quite a lot of people. Although our parents were amazingly supportive of that. Which now
Mm,
I look back, like when I hear about people getting engaged that age now, I'm like, oh gosh, what's going on? And then I'm like, well, that was me. um, yeah, so people were concerned on our behalf,
mm,
and partly because they were saying, you guys are both going to be growing and developing as people until you're
mm,
25, really.
mm,
Like everything that's going on in your brains and personality wise is still going to be shifting and changing, and
mm,
you're getting married when you're 19. So what if you realize in 6 years time that you're different people
mm,
to who you said yes to then? And which was an interesting point, and I did want to take that on board, but I still think like that's still true even if I got engaged when I was 30.
mm.
Really, like people do grow and change anyway.
True. Yeah.
But for us, like, and I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but for us, it was definitely a benefit to do that last bit of kind of growing up stuff together. Um, and yeah, just kind of, so we had a bit of kind of marriage preparation stuff as well. And just people asking you questions of like, so what's the most amount of money that you would go and spend without telling the other person you were about to? And I've heard stories of our friends being asked that same question as well. One person said £50, the other person said 500, and they were sat there looking at each other like, "Oh my gosh, that's a big difference." Really glad someone asked us that um, before before that happened in real life, but we had a big argument about it. Um,
That's
but
interesting
even
though,
that,
but
like,
and yeah, because it's interesting that you had that discussion, and I know we're kind of drifting into the couple space, but I think this is relevant because it sounds like from the perspective of what is manly, um, your husband had this open discussions with you about this development. So he was um, supportive. Well, he obviously wanted to be together and was having these discussions, and you were finding out, and you were developing what was right for you as a couple. And he. It sounds like he was developing what was right for him, so that, but as a couple as well. Is that fair to say?
yeah, I think so. So he's always been super supportive of anything that I want to do. Like even when I'm like, oh my gosh, my business is too hard. Maybe I just need to go and work in the supermarket for a couple of months and figure out what's next. And he's just like, no, like you were called to this. What are you doing? Like just keep going. um, and yeah, or even to the point where I'm just like, oh gosh, money's really not going to be okay. Like we need to shift and change and stuff. And he's like, no, it's absolutely going to be all right. So again, like I think it's just like a crazy good kind of personality match where we're really different, but in a good way. So when I'm going off getting excited about a million different things and over committing to stuff and not doing all this stuff, he's the person that is just like, and stop. Like, what's going on? Um,
Is that
and yeah,
Is that a manly trait that we look to? Because there's had someone describe it when we're having this discussion, and they said that the woman is like the flow. She's got the empathy, and she's like the river, but the man is like the river banks, and sort of kind of keeps that guidance there as well. And that's why they work well together, because a river banks without any flow is not going to work. But if the flow doesn't have some guidance around it, then it's not going to go. And I don't want that to come across as the man guides everything, because that's not the point. That was the analogy, and it was put to me by a woman. So I was just wondering, is that kind of that thing from a manly perspective, to because I've heard it described as well that in a relationship the man should be the rock, no matter what emotions and ups and downs come there. He just needs to be this steady rock that is always there, always supportive, that kind of thing. Is that a manly trait, or is that too old fashioned?
yeah. So it's like a weird, what's the word for it? Like kind of a both and situation in our house. So we would both view each other as complete equals,
Mm,
and we're both supporting each other on everything. And yet we both grew up in traditional households where there is a head of the household, and that is the man.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes I'm not like, I would default to be like, right, what's your view on this? Can you make the final decision? I'd actually rather not. And
It's
quite
not the
like
first time I've heard that being said.
it's sometimes nice to know, right, someone else has got this, and I can just trust that this other person is holding this and has complete faith that this is going to be all right, and they'll maybe rescue me if it all goes wrong. However, that's not really how I view us as people, like as a unit either. So it's a really interesting thing going on. And I don't know whether we talked about the Enneagram last time or not.
No,
Are you
not
familiar
really.
with the Enneagram?
You briefly mentioned it, but we didn't get into detail. If you
Yeah,
want to
so
cover it
it's
again for the
like,
people, not who haven't.
it's a bit like a personality assessment, but it's it's one you really need to go on a journey on and really figure out. You don't just do the online assessment and suddenly know a thing, but it's about motivation and why you do things. And for me, I come under the heading the enthusiast. And so I will just, you can literally get me excited about anything. Doesn't even matter whether I was previously excited about it. I will just, someone will tell me something and I'll be like, oh yeah, that's amazing. Let's go and do that. Like just a new thing or something fun will always trump everything else. And whereas my husband, he hasn't fully done the assessment thing yet, but what I'm guessing he is much more around knowledge and analysis and research, and he wants all the information first to do a good job of everything. And so that's actually how it plays out, rather than me how you described it with the flow and the that. It's much more, I'm all over the place just getting bubbly and excited about everything, and he's like, where's the evidence for why this is a good idea? And I'm like, well, it was just fun. So and that's not because of what I've looked into with the Enneagram stuff. I do know plenty of men who are also the enthusiasts, and it would probably be their partners being like, wow, what's going on here?
I definitely fit that category myself. I put it down to being that I'm a Leo rat. If you go for the star signs, the Western and Eastern star signs, I'm not that big into them, but because I'm a rat and a cat, I like shiny things. So I go, oh, shiny thing, and jump over there. And I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, that's fire. Get out. And I've got to balance it out. So yeah, I don't think that's a masculine or feminine trait, but I'm just wondering from the perspective of what you're talking about. Is that, as you said, it's nice to have someone to make at sometimes make that decision, say, okay, I don't have to worry about that.
It does make me think. So like, if I was a single parent, or if I had housemates and no children, how would I be viewing the different people in my life? Is an interesting thing, because probably in my head I do put quite a lot of kind of those decisions of, right, I've got my husband, so there is kind of safety and there is a rock, like you were saying. But would I get that from other people in other roles if I didn't have him? Is an interesting thing, and potentially not a gender. I was like, would I just move if I didn't have him, would I just move my best mates in, and would they be my rocks? Potentially, yes. Like, I don't know.
I don't think it's a gender thing, because I know from my perspective, there's many times, where I've been in a relationship and it's just like, you make the decision. I don't want to do it. I've made enough decisions about stuff, and I don't want to do it on this. And there's a number of topics and categories where I just go, I'm not making that decision. It's your job. And
it probably, and maybe it just comes back to, actually, we're very individualistic in Western society, and actually we're built a community. And so sometimes it is really, really nice just to not be doing all the stuff in your own head and making all your own decisions.
I 100% agree with that. There's times where I said, I just don't want to make the decision. It's just like asking me, what would you like? I said, you decide. I don't care. I don't even want to have to think about it. Just tell me where to be and I'll show up. So it's
Have you
interesting from.
spoken to many people? Sorry to interrupt. I'm just interested because, like, culturally, I've been learning a lot of neuroscience, but
Mm,
it's all written by a lot of white Western men, and
mm,
they are the first to say a lot of what we're learning at the moment is all based on white Western culture. And
mm,
actually, if you speak to many people around the world, there's a much higher percentage of people that don't understand what feeling individual is, because you are who you are because of everyone around you. And so a lot of the neuroscience principles we're learning about self is just completely different. So I'd be very interested to know how men in different cultures and communities view themselves, yeah, in a non-individualistic way. Because the example was, I'm trying to actually like think of a place where this is definitely true, and it's not coming to me. But there are many people who you ask them to describe themselves, and they immediately start describing other people because they're literally part of them and how they view their identity. That's just not a separate thing to them, and you would make decisions because of what is happening in the community, not because of what's happening in your life.
yeah, it's interesting because even from I have a European background, and some of the older European background, it was very much even the man was technically stronger, but it was always the woman that was in charge.
Mm.
The analogy was like the man is the head of the family, but the woman is the neck, and she turns the head any direction she wants. And I had some friends from Afghanistan talk about the same sort of thing. They had the analogy that the man makes the big decisions, the woman makes the small decisions. The small decisions were where we live, how much, where he works, where the kids go to school. Everything to do with how they live their life was technically the small decision. So I know those jokes are kind of, but I think there's a fair bit of truth that I just said, having the European background that I have. The woman was very much the head of the household. The man just did he got his allowance. He went to work, got his even some friends with an Irish background that I have, which they were very much the man went to work. He come home, gave her the money. He got his allowance, and then she ran the house. And he had his allowance to go to the pub and have a drink with, and that was all he got to do, and that was his decision making as far as it went. He was and pretty much told where he was to go to work as well. Um, so it's an interesting dynamic that we have, and as you say, the cultures in some of the countries that I've travelled to, I did notice that where it's more of a communal base, it's not this individualistic type thing that you're talking about. I didn't explore it as well. I wish I did. Now that you mentioned that, but this is where we're trying to get to this. Maybe have we gone too far? Do you think in this individualistic persona where we all think we're alone when really people around the world are having the same thoughts and problems that we're having, and we just had the discussion rather than had more of a community, then this wouldn't be such a big an issue.
Yeah, so I was just about to say, I think it's where all the loneliness, like, and all the breakdowns come from, because we've been taught we can do anything, we're capable of anything, just learn what resilience is, get on with it. Like, we can do it all. And
Yeah.
actually, we really can't. We really can't.
I've yet to meet
So,
someone that's done it all by themselves. Everyone,
yeah,
and I know some very successful people that are very, very wealthy, very, and very wonderful families, from what I can tell. And you can tell when people still love. People say, "Oh, but doesn't what's going behind can't be going on behind closed doors." But when you've got a couple that's 60 and still walking down the street holding each other's hands, that it's a pretty good indication that. Unless they're really, really faking it, you can always tell the other ones that there's one 100 meters ahead of the other person when they're walking. um, Bless you.
yeah, yeah. I just think if we're being brought up to think, well, yeah, I'm going to be capable of doing everything, but I also need to carry some other people along the way, and
Mm,
to not be able to do that is to fail, and failing's not okay, then just becomes this internal disaster, doesn't it? Because
mm.
um yeah, you're believing all this stuff that you're having to follow through on just completely alone.
And you've got an impossible task as well. To say that you're not going to fail is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lady who I follow on Instagram, and her podcast is called How to Fail, and she just gets everyone's failing stories, like just
Yeah.
to normalize it, to be like, actually, this is how we learn.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because and I got to this because you remember when you walk down the street and you trip over and you get all embarrassed and stuff like that, which I used to do when I was younger. Now, whenever that happens, I jump up and cheer and go, "Yay!" and everyone goes, "Yeah!" Have a little bit of a clap and just own it, because we're human. That's why I made a mistake at the start of this podcast. I screwed it up. That's human. And is that something that we need to? Do we need to have more of that discussion? Is that part of the framework for being manly? Obviously it applies to both genders, but for the people that are lost, the men that are lost and lonely, it's like, just, it's okay to fail. Get out there and talk with people, and you'll be okay. Do we need to be having those discussions with those people?
Yeah, I think so. And tied in with that of needing other people to help you, because being self-sufficient is overrated and impossible, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
It's yeah, I think it just then all starts building up internally of like, well, what is going to happen if this doesn't work out? Whereas again, I think this is slightly coming from my personality of, I just try everything, and everything new is exciting, and I like changing things up all the time. But I see everything as a bit of a pilot version, and nothing's a forever decision apart from my marriage. It does amaze me that I made that decision when I was that age, and I'm still super keen on it, because nothing else in life I'm like literally the most changeable person. It's very funny. But
we all
so
need
I
that
see a
place
lot
of stability, maybe, and that's where you found your stability.
Yeah,
You've got the freedom to go and do all the other
yeah,
stuff because you have that stability at home. Maybe.
Yeah, that's true. But I think I do see a lot of people where there's so much kind of layered under every decision that they make, because will this be the thing that gets me to where I want to be, or that makes me look more acceptable in society, or gets me to the house and the job and the family that I need. And then everything becomes a forever massive decision, and it's just completely paralyzing. Yeah, so I don't think that's personally something I've had to work through, because I just like switching it up all the time. But I know that that's definitely not true for everyone else. Yeah.
The point
And even talking about...
No,
Sorry, you go.
No.
I was just saying as well, like growing up where I did, the assumption that it's the best version of life if you can get to university, get a good job, then you might want to find a partner. Then, like things, just if someone's done a certain number of stuff, there's almost like an ideal order, or like a preferred order to do things. And if someone, I often had friends, because I got married so early, people thought that I was one step up some kind of weird hierarchy than them, and that I was leaving them behind because I'd kind of got on this ladder somehow and was doing better at life than them. And I was just like, I didn't plan to get married. Like, this wasn't like some grand design of something that I just decided, right, I'll get in there early on the marriage thing, and then I'll sort out a house, and then I'll get a job. Like, just, yeah, it's just interesting that we kind of think of it like a vertical thing. I think where actually it doesn't matter. It's not some kind of standing that I've got. Yeah.
Do you think for men there's too much, because you mentioned look at what's acceptable in society? Do you think there's too much pressure, or they give themselves too much pressure, I'll put it that way, that they have to conform to some societal thing, where, as opposed to deciding what's right for them and just doing that?
Yeah, I think so, because I think there is a balance, isn't there, of making a good decision of, so what is going to get me the house that I want, and being able to pay the bills and help cover some family costs if that's where I end up being. But am I compromising everything that I am good at or would love to do in the workplace or outside the home just to make that home life look kind of picture perfect, or what everyone's told me that I should be doing? It is interesting, because I would I would primarily be going, well, what do you love doing? What are you amazing at? Go chase that. But at the same time, that's not reality, is it, necessarily? You can't just say, well, quit everything and go chase your dreams, because that'll be a better life, because then you might lose your house. But but if to choose one extreme or the other it's always going to cause you some issues, isn't it? Because there's not going to be that internal I was going to say joy, but it's more like, yeah, you're always going to feel like something's missing, I think, if you're playing down some part of it in order to chase the other.
Yeah, because I know from my perspective, there was a period in my life where I was really concerned about what other people thought, which is ironic because it's ironic because when I was younger, my mum was always very strong on, doesn't matter what other people think, and that used to annoy the hell out of me when I was a kid. People, regular listeners will know that, going about her beanies that she used to wear, and that was before beanies were cool. And it's like, she'd say, it doesn't matter what other people think. I'm going to take the thing off. It's horrible. You're embarrassing me. And then, there was a period in my, I think, early 20s ish, where I was really worried about what other people thought, and that was my focus. And it wasn't fulfilling at all, and you could never achieve success. And then finally I got to a point where I just said, I'm going to be the Damien Andrews, and people are going to like it or they're not going to like it, and they can suck it up if they don't like it, or they can go away. I'm not really fussed. I'm going in this direction. And from then it became, it didn't happen overnight, but for me, it got to the point now where every day I'm really happy. I enjoy what I do, and I spend, work with people that I spend time with. I get along with a lot more people than I ever got along with in the past. And that made all the difference. But do I get along with everybody? No. But is that the kind of thing we're circling back here to? We just need to, as men, and I suppose it's the same for women too, but it's we just need to decide on what is right for us, and stick to that regardless of what anybody else says.
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting as well. So 20 years ago, when we were at university, I would think I'd probably be right in saying that our families were very excited that we're at university, and that was a great thing, and that everyone should go to university if they can. Whereas I was talking to my sister-in-law recently, who's also, so I've got two sons. She's got a son who's just one. Mine are a bit older than that. And she was saying, gosh, like, do you care if your kids go to university? And I was like, oh no, like, really, whatever. Like, if they can do what they want, we're kind of, because we're entrepreneurs, they're kind of picking up on what that kind of lifestyle could look like. But equally, then she was saying, gosh, if he could be a plumber and just know that everyone needs what he's good at some point in life and there's always going to be work, I'd much rather that than him spend years, and ending up writing some thesis that's really, really interesting, but just seemed like the right thing to do. And actually then he's stressed about stuff all the time. But equally, neither of us, I don't think, have a certain idea for what success looks like for those boys in kind of academic senses. Whereas I think my husband would probably tell you differently what it was like when we were growing up. If you do this many scientific subjects, not too many arty ones, make sure there's like keeping your options open, but where you're going at the same time.
Yeah.
The stuff. Whereas we're a bit like, right, make sure you're doing the hard stuff and you know what you're good at and you're chasing after some things and not just giving up because it was hard, but also finding out what you love and not letting that go either.
So they're the conversations that you have with your sons, is that, make sure you should make sure you're doing the hard stuff, know what you like. That's pretty profound, knowing what you like. Is that
the
conversations that you have?
We were just a bit aware. So my boys are 10 and 8, and the older one, they go to school in a very deprived area, and he's really good at maths.
Yeah.
And he obviously has parents at home who help with schoolwork, who encourage him to do a lot of things. That's not the case for a lot of other children in that school.
Right.
And so it's interesting because I think if we'd kind of plucked him out of there and put him in a private school somewhere, he wouldn't be the brainy kid or the middle class kid, or he would really have to fight for how he was different and what he was good at. Whereas because of where he's gone to school at the moment, he is the brainy kid, and I think they call him the maths robot. They like literally just throw sums at him all the time and he just says it straight back to them. And he's just kind of doing a Rubik's Cube all the time, like whilst talking to you about other stuff. But if he doesn't want to study maths after his exams when he's 16, or if he doesn't if he suddenly realizes maths has no place in my life actually, or I'm a bit bored of it, or actually I've stopped being good at it, I don't want him to have some kind of crisis because he was the maths guy. And so we just kind of have conversations around we're also good at this, or what else do you want to try, and what else do you want to have a go at, or how else would you describe yourself, so that it doesn't become, well, the older one's the kind of the one who might end up being an engineer or an inventor or something, and the younger one is the one who wants to be I think currently he wants to be a football freestyler so that he can have a YouTube channel. But which is fine if he wants to do that, but equally, if suddenly life isn't all about football anymore, again, don't want you to be on the kitchen floor having a massive identity crisis because that's everything you knew about yourself. So I think we just kind of try and talk about that and try and get that balance of saying you can do whatever you want to do, but actually you have certain skills and talents in you, and so therefore that actually means the opposite. If you can't just do anything, you won't be good at everything. And you won't be amazing at all the same things that your friends are amazing at. So it's not this whole just pick a thing and go and be good at it. It's knowing what's in you as well.
It sounds like from that perspective,
they're quite small. We don't have that level of doesn't come out like that quite to an 8-year-old.
No, but it sounds like the framework that's there. I mean, if we're looking at again the framework of being manly, the framework is there is for them to decide on what's right for them, but they're also aware of what they're good at and paying attention to that as well. If I was to encapsulate that, have I got that right?
Yeah, I think so. And helping them to realize that if you want to be really good at something, if something shows up as a skill or a kind of a passion, so my youngest one in football, he's 8, and we've heard through a friend of a friend who's a teacher at secondary school that there's kids at the secondary school who know my kid from just playing in the park as the skills kid who you want to go and play football with. So we're like, oh, you're getting famous, which is quite funny. But we've also been saying, well, actually, if you don't practice that every day and you don't really put in the time and effort into that, that's not going to be what people are saying in a few years' time, because other people will have also got the same level of skills, or it takes some hard work, even when it's an innate kind of gifting that you've got. And so, but then from a CliftonStrengths point of view, I also know it to be true that whatever is kind of inbuilt in you, you can see exponential growth in. So it's this weird kind of I can't speak anymore, opposing thing again, where I know he's got something in him that could take him a lot further and with a lot more ease than someone else who doesn't have that, and yet he still needs to put the hard work in and not do stuff just because it's easy. So we do have a little bit of conversation about that as well, because they would much rather just try a new thing and then give up on it after 5 minutes. And sometimes that's fine, sometimes it's not. So
it's interesting. And you mentioned that from where they're going to school. How much do you think that your the role modeling plays a part in how your sons behave compared to, say, other children, or just generally compared to children, but having that role model that your husband has for the children? How important do you think that is to their development?
Yeah, it's pretty massive, I think. So a lot of the other kids kind of gravitate actually towards my husband because their dads might not be around as much, or definitely not on the school run. And what is interesting is we hear ourselves saying that classic parenting thing that like all kids roll their eyes at, like, oh, but you don't know how good you've got it because the people over there,
Yeah.
they don't get to do these things. They don't get like, so it's just funny because we both work from home. The kids will still quite regularly be moaning like, but we don't see you and you won't play that game with me when we ask you to, and we won't do this and you won't do that. And we're like, oh my gosh, some kids' parents are at work 8 till 6 and they are at school that whole time or in childcare, or like you get to see us a lot. And obviously like they just have no concept that they get to see us a lot.
Yeah.
Which is quite funny. And obviously that's not the kind of conversations they'd be having with their friends. Oh, well, how many hours after school do you see your dad? And how many hours at the weekend does your dad say yes to board games? And how many hours, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is, so maybe we just got different expectations without kind of holding them to like, this is definitely what we want for your life regardless, because I want them to make their own way. I guess we are still expecting them to be trying hard at school and doing all their homework and following the rules, which a lot of other families in our area probably are not modelling, because attendance is kind of optional and having a job might not be something that you assume is something you're going to do, or might not even be possible for you because of your educational achievements. So yeah, it's really interesting just seeing what it'd be interesting to ask my kids actually, what do you think? We've actually talked about that.
That's an interesting point that you make, especially about the following of the rules as well. Certainly conscientiousness is it's certainly a predictor of success in any form, whether it's, personal success or personal growth, business, finances. It's certainly a predictor of that. This following of the rules as a framework for being manly, is that something that you think is important for your young boys to have that discipline to stick at something, and if they choose to do something, to stick at it until they decide that maybe they don't want to do it anymore, but while they're wanting to do that, to have that discipline to really give it a go?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we disagree on this, and when we have parenting chats about it, so my husband will probably say that I quit stuff quite a lot, whereas I view it as I'm just trying a load of things out until I land on the right one.
Yeah.
I also, on my CliftonStrengths assessment, I have there is a talent called responsibility, and it's not necessarily how you would use that word in general conversation, but it does mean I have this internal kind of compass where I'm like, I'm always going to do what I said I'm going to do. And I'm much more aware of kind of rules and expectations of society or whatever system I'm in. I feel that quite strongly. And yet the part of the Enneagram that I described in me quite likes to rebel just to see what happens, like just for a bit of fun. So like nothing like actually like,
so you're really Peter Pan.
But every now and then I'm like, that person said do that, I might do the opposite and see what happens. But which is, again, as I was going to write a blog about living in a world of opposites, because those things don't feel like they should live together in the same person. But it's interesting because so I feel like I just kind of pivot all the time into what I'm doing and why, whereas my husband would be much more focused and been like, we've said we're going to do this, so we're seeing it through regardless. And I think how that's panned out for my boys is that they have very high sense of justice. So again, like they're very black and white about a load of stuff, and if they're watching something play out at school and they can see that the teacher's missed something and something unjust has happened in the consequence for some child or for the whole class, they feel that so deeply.
Oh, really? Yeah.
They're just like, not right. So just kind of helping them through that, and having the other interesting thing actually that we've realised is that, so I grew up in a family of 4. My husband grew up in a family of 6. My family, therefore, were much more focused on what is fair, because there's 2 children who are watching very closely what is happening to the other child and checking on the fairness. And so my parents it was hard to kind of dilute that. Whereas because my husband grew up one of 4, his dad's main motto was, "There's no such thing as fair. Like, just don't even say that word to me. There's so many of you everywhere. Like, it just got to be fair."
Yeah.
Which is interesting. But having said that, I think they probably had all the same rules and boundaries. Whereas we grew up with another family who had 4 kids, and actually they built all their kind of rules and consequences and boundaries around each individual child and what they knew about that child and about their personality, and therefore the different boundaries that those children needed, which I found fascinating. And they were very open with the children about that. And whether those now adults would say that was a good thing or not anymore, I don't know. But I found it, like, I did think, yeah, actually, not people don't need the same rules. That's not how to be equal or fair. Actually, they need what's right for them. So that kind of goes on in the back of my mind. But we also foster. So when we have extra kids come into our house, our boys have been able to watch us parent someone else and have had that conversation with us of, yes, we're holding you to account for this, but you might not watch us follow through on the same rules for this person over here because of all these things that have happened to them, and they need that situation dealt with differently. So I don't think they're still too small to understand that fully, but they do understand a bit that there's sometimes different rules for different people.
Interesting point that you raised there about the different rules for different people, and having that understanding of each other. And I guess that's part of that balance. If you're, from a guy perspective, if you're, in this framework of what is manly, it's knowing what the right rules are for you and being able to instill them. And I think it applies to women as well. But we're talking to the men out there that are lost. For those that are listening, if it's really about you having the right rules for you and taking that out into the world. Obviously, working with the framework of what the law allows, but we put that as a presupposition that's being there. But really, because there's a lot of scope as to what can be done, and that's part of what I was wondering at the very start of this when we're talking about people having so much freedom now and not actually being taught how to decide what is right for them.
There's also made me think, I wonder what my 10-year-old would say to you at the moment if I said to him, would you expect to be the main income earner in your household? Or do you think there's a kind of best time to get married or have kids or make decisions about life? And I don't know. My younger one, he would tell you that he wants to stay in this house. He'd prefer us all to grow up and him stay in my house now and for me to have moved on. and I think he thinks it's like the royal family, that like there becomes a generation who just get to take on everything. And I'm like, no, this is still my house. But he's not interested. I mean, he's only 8, this is going to change probably, or might not, but he doesn't want to get married. He'd like to live in this house. And he's in that bit where he doesn't know, like he can't even imagine the fact that I might live somewhere else and he might not know where that is. So we have interesting chats about that. But my 10-year-old, I'd be really interested to know does that make you feel less of a man if you suddenly thought, well, I'm going to live with someone who earns more than me, or my calendar looks like this, while someone else's looks like that. I really don't know what he would think about that currently. And it's interesting. Or even if there's a certain pattern that's like a better way to be running your life. Because the other thing that me and my husband did was a bit different to the rest of our family, is that because we got married while we were at university, we then we went traveling, and everyone else we knew were trying to get a proper job, and figure out where they were going to live, and we were just like, we're off on an adventure with no idea what's going on.
So it's kind of, you were working together from the beginning by the sounds of it, because I mean, if you're traveling, and unless you had a huge amount of money saved up, which I'm guessing you probably didn't, that you would have had to be economical in your traveling and work things out as you went. But I'm guessing it wasn't, you were out there doing stuff around, and he was just sitting in the couch going, "Come on, babe, spend the money so we can go to our next place." I don't imagine that was the story.
Yeah. But it's also interesting, like, I think we were both on the same page, as in we weren't waiting for one or the other one of us to have figured out what we were doing with our lives and to go and get the job that's going to solve it all. And I'd be interested to know, if we were both single during that time, would he have felt more pressure to do that than I did because of our genders? But then probably it was never on his radar to get married at any point either. So he'd probably be off just doing his own thing and not thinking twice of it anyway, would be my guess. Because, it was a bit of a surprise to both of us that we found someone that young that was actually going to stick around. So maybe the flip side of it is, we're back to the individual thing of, you're just doing the next thing in front of you, and it's not actually feeding into a wider picture that it may or may not involve someone else. Anyway, and maybe that's then. So I do coach actually a few people who are kind of coming up to the age of 30 and having a little kind of like a little wobble about like, right, well, what have I actually done then? And have I got to where I want to be? Or have I literally just said yes to every opportunity in front of me because that felt like the sensible grown-up thing to do? And actually, am I even where I want to be? And I've seen that with people who are in families and who are not. And I think it works both ways, doesn't it? Of people going, oh, crap, I'm now this person in this position, and I might need to shift and change a load of things before I'm actually where I realise I want to be. Or from the outside, I look successful because I'm working and I've got a house and I've got a family, but actually I'm not doing anything that I love. And that's eating me up. So, interesting.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because you're talking about, and as I'm listening to your story, I'm hearing about how you and your husband, you decided, just, we're going to go do this. We're going to go travel. We're not worried about the job or things like that. We're just going to do, and it sounds like you were doing what was right for you. And that's why I'm looking at it from the framework of what is manly. It's we keep circling back, and it's amazing how many conversations I've had circle back to this. Just decide on what's right for you. Doesn't matter what society says. Decide on what's right for you. There is a right person out for you. There's probably lots of them out there. You just got to find the one. You don't need all of them. I mean, just one, and that fits with, that likes you for you. And if you don't know who you are or even like who you are, then that's going to be hard for someone to like you, or even to firstly know you and like you, if you don't have those two. But really, it seems to be from a guy perspective, you just need to really, know who you are, like who you are, and from there, do what you love, because and then you'll feel useful, and you'll also attract someone that fits well with you, which is what it's about. It's not like there's a perfect person out there. I had fitness on my list of questions to ask, because I mean, there's this thing about the man's got to be this Adonis fit type guy, but majority of guys that I know in happy relationships don't fit that description, and they're very happy relationships. They're also very good at their job. So is that, so is it this case of when you look at your husband and look at your boys and going, well, I'm just happy for you to be who you are? I mean, I'm guessing you love your husband just because of who he is, not because he fits some mold of what is expected to be manly.
Yeah, I think that's true. And he can be quite a big fitness fanatic, to be honest. And whilst I want that for him from a health perspective, we probably have the opposite reaction where I'm just like, when are you coming back? Like, we just want to hang out with you. Like, stop doing all this exercise.
Yeah.
But yeah. No, I think I wonder whether we just lucked out because we were both on the same trajectory of we're always going to want to keep growing and developing ourselves and to be checking in with each other about that. And then lots of things along the way have also been aligned with just how we make decisions about life. Yeah. And interestingly, that we're both now self-employed, that we don't have any kind of third parties. We're not having arguments about bosses and expectations from outside people. We are getting to make all our own decisions, which comes with its own stresses, but we're not living under anyone else's expectations and kind of, our hours are all our own hours. So it means that when we're looking into all the kind of, we're looking into a load of lifespan stuff recently, and are we actually doing the best for ourselves? And we're completely in control then of all those decisions. It's not like we're having to do that outside of the office hours, or we just get to put it bang in the middle of everything we're doing. So I think probably that then comes back to what I want from my boys is I'm thinking, do you know who you are and what you're good at, which is kind of my CliftonStrengths and purpose and calling stuff. And then do you actually know how to overcome kind of negative thinking or all this stuff coming at you from everywhere else? And that's where my positive intelligence stuff comes in, because it's all about mental fitness. And do you actually know what's happening internally in your mind and what to do with that? Like, what's in your power to control that, and what is in your power to control in all the stuff happening outside of you. I think we put much more of a focus on that rather than, you've picked these subjects and you're going to get those grades, and then you want to work that job so you can buy I think it's a purple Lamborghini they want currently as an 8 and a 10-year-old. But also I think along the way we're actually constantly going, there's more than one route to where you want to go. So because in their heads at the moment, with all the stuff that feeds them, considering we're pretty kind of like shut down and strict on what they watch and what they read, they still think, right, the best version of my life that I can see is being either a professional footballer or someone with my own YouTube channel. And we're like, there are more routes to the life than you want to just that. And if it's money, then actually entrepreneurs can make more money than footballers, and to just kind of drop that little seed in there. Or like, entrepreneurs can work till they're 80 if they want. Footballers will retire before their mum and dad's age. Like, and then what?
Or have to stop because their body's broken.
Yeah. Or actually, the manager of your football team is going to have a lot to say about what you're eating and drinking so that you stay fit for the team, and do you want more control of your own body? So just kind of giving them little snippets of, what is it you're actually looking for? And is that ticking all the boxes? And obviously it's far too early for them to really make any of those decisions, but just before they get certain ideas embedded, I think we're up for disrupting that a little bit. And yet that sounds really weird as I say that out loud, because we are such kind of community focused, rule following people. It's quite amusing that I then hear myself talk about just do anything you want all the time, whatever, it's the best for you. That's actually not how I live my life, really, because I'm constantly considering, so what's actually best for the collective here, and what's going on wider than us, and how can we be involved in that? This isn't actually finding out who I am and what I want to do and what I'm best at, is actually for the benefit of everyone else, not really, even though it is the best for me as well.
It's interesting you mentioned about doing something for the community and helping that and helping out. Because you noting there having a higher purpose, it sounds like that's really important as well. Having something more than yourself. Is that something we'd add to the framework for what is manly? Is to have a high purpose, something that you care about more than yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I'm trying to remember there's some crazy statistic about if you actually have a purpose or are linked into something that feels bigger than yourself, like it actually extends your lifespan. It's like
Okay.
actually helps you live longer because you have some kind of
Okay.
sense of the kind of moreness
Yeah.
of, and I guess actually it probably more helps lift you out of low moments of like, it's all about me and it's all gone wrong and it's all terrible, so that's the end. So whereas
Mm.
actually when you can kind of see past that and be like, actually this is linked to wider and bigger things, and it doesn't all just end with me. Actually, maybe there is something and someone out there that
Mm.
that this also relies on, rather than me having to figure it all out. That, yeah, seems to kind of pull people along a bit. So, but where that links into community stuff, I think, yeah. Sorry, you go.
I was going to say, well, contributing to your community gives you a higher sense of purpose as well. It's not just about you; you're helping the community as a whole.
Mm, yeah, and also I think if I know everything about what I'm good at and believe I'm kind of made to do certain things that other people can't do, then what would be the point if that was only going to benefit me?
Mm.
Like, I feel like everything that we've got in us is because if we're all doing those things, it becomes more cohesive for the society that we live in. So I would love to, like, it would take a massive rejig and it would be a nightmare for a really long time. But I do believe we can actually all find a job completely tailored to what we're brilliant at, and
Mm.
if or to be volunteering or kind of showing up at places because of what we individually bring. And if we were all to do that, everything would just run so much more smoothly than us trying to kind of mold ourselves to be this and be that, and or try and do that because I'm kind of good at that and I might learn to be better at it. It just makes it harder for everyone. Whereas actually, if we were like, this is what I'm amazing at and this is why it's brilliant for everyone else, without it becoming a massive egotistical thing,
Mm.
then it's yeah. And building on that, the other interesting thing that I haven't found out yet about my kids is whether they care about legacy or
Mm.
not, because a lot of I'm hearing a lot of people talk about that on social media at the moment, and people doing things because of what they want to leave behind. So they're building something in order for there to be this massive legacy. And again, I'm interested to know whether that's a gender thing, because for me and my personality, literally couldn't care less about what my legacy is. Like, and that's not to say that I don't want to make a difference,
Mm.
and it's not to say that I don't want people to know who I am, but I'm not like, if I never walked on a stage, I wouldn't care. If people knew things about what I'd said and done, but didn't know that that was actually me, I wouldn't care. Like, that's absolutely fine. Whereas I know it's deeply in some people that they need to know that there's links between what they did and what comes next, and that's attributed to them. So I'm interested to see how that shows up
Mm.
in my kids.
Interesting. And from that, before you mentioned too about having your children having a sense of justice, it's something that I've been very interested in from that perspective within the framework. And I was looking for a lot of that to do, especially with share.care. We were looking at that, and one of the things we looked at was some higher set of principles that we would aspire to enact in circumstances that even if you could do something, you would adhere to those principles. And we actually rewrote the Knights Code, the old medieval Knights Code of chivalry, for a modern day society, and made it gender neutral. Do you think, when you talk about your boys having a sense of justice, do you think as a framework, again, for what is manly, that there needs to be this higher set of principles that we adhere to, whether it's, again, it can apply to both genders, but do you think men need to have that framework to go, this is how I'm going to behave in these situations. I've got this higher set of principles that I will adhere to.
Hmm. Yes, the first thing that made me think of is that actually my oldest son did want to be a policeman for a while, and I did used to think, gosh, that would really suit you because you love sorting out what's right and wrong, and you do kind of get other people. So I don't think he would just launch in there and be like, oh, guys, you got it all wrong, I'm here to sort it out. Like, he would actually be able to deal with the social situation as well, which is really interesting. And then I've lost my train of thought of what the thing I was going to say is. But I think, no, the other thing is I think I just don't think we've got far enough down the line yet of figuring out. So I think some of my male friends would be like, right, the right thing to do in this situation and to empower everyone around me is to make sure that I really speak up about women, or I really I'm still opening doors for people, or I'm making sure that I'm acting in a certain way to prove that there's equality or that we're all valued. Whereas, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying for some people, that's going to be brilliant and they're going to really be pleased that that's happened. For other people, they're going to react to it because that's not how they want that to be shown. So they wouldn't think that you opening a door for them is a helpful thing. They'd think that you're doing that because I'm a woman and I can open a door myself. Whereas other people are just so grateful that you just did the door thing.
Yeah.
And so you can just kind of shoot yourself in the foot because you can't win. And I just think that we need kind of more conversations about what this actually looks like. So what's the other example I thought of then? Sorry, I keep taking this back to women rather than men because
no, but it's related
because of my lived experience. So I went to a talk. There was a lady who was going to try and a team that was going to do some crazy rowing race across the Pacific, and they were going to be doing it for months. And they'd had all this training about well, what if you meet a shark bigger than your boat, and what if one of your team members is out and one of you's left rowing, one of you's needing medical attention, the other one's giving the medical attention, what are you going to do? All these crazy scenarios. And the interviewer was saying, well, why are you even going to do this then? And she said, because I need my niece to know that girls can do anything. And I had quite a deep reaction to that, because I was thinking, except that was the message 10 years ago. Girls that I know genuinely believe they can do anything now. They just need to know how to do that or what to choose. The message isn't anymore. You're not having to convince anyone that they can do anything. They believe they have a right to do anything.
Yes.
It's just kind of, there's a slight nuance to it now, and I just think we're not quite catching up with where people are at necessarily, and therefore people just kind of, I do sometimes feel gosh, it's really hard for men to get any of this right, because women are getting so outspoken about different stuff, and it's different for all the women. Women are talking as if women are all the same in trying to help this thing, and we're just all making each other completely freeze and not do the thing because we can't get any of it right.
That's interesting. I mean, because from that perspective, it's very interesting to have that conversation, because as you're talking about, and linking that back to what we talked about before, was about doing what's right for you. So again, this framework of what is manly, there's, like you said, there's going to be some women that don't like you holding the door open. Fortunately, from my perspective, because I hold the door open for everybody, man or woman, I usually let everyone go first. I haven't had any woman as yet say to me that's not appropriate. So if any guys are thinking about that, then just smile. If you're smiling, it's hard for someone to get upset you anyway. But from that perspective, are we circling back to, as you said, there's some women that are going to say, no, don't do that. Other women are going to go say, thank you very much. It's you doing what's right for you. And then, particularly in your own life, aligning with people that align similar to that, not trying to align and please everybody, because it's just not possible. Is that where we're circling back to?
Yeah, so maybe we're back to kind of being transparent or vulnerable enough to kind of call stuff out of like, actually, I wasn't doing that to make a statement or because you were a person of a certain demographic. It's because I do that for everyone. And is that all right? Or what do I need to know about that from your perspective if you didn't think it was right? Yeah.
That's an interesting point you make, because I saw that on a and it's a slightly different topic, but I saw that on a talk show where they had a panel and they were asking people, and the lady that was moderating, she was going around the panel, and it just happened to be a question that to do with color, and the next person in line happened to be the person of color to ask the question first. Well, he just chimed back and go, "Oh, ask the person of color first." And I was thinking, again, she was in a no-win situation. Firstly, she was just going around the room anyway, because then he was next in line, just happened to be how that lined up. But if she hadn't have asked him that question, be, well, why aren't you asking the guy of color first? Are you discriminating? So it's kind of, whichever way they could have jumped up and down and had a complaint. So that's where
it's so hard to have those conversations when you've got so many inbuilt lenses on everything. So I will have many, many reactions to issues around women because I'm a woman, and I, as much as I try and kind of fight against that and be aware of where that's showing up, I will still. So like I had an email recently that said, this is all the things on this weekend. Isn't it amazing that they were all really strong women doing these talks? And my immediate reaction was like, why have you even pointed out that they're women? They're just people doing amazing jobs. Like, whereas other people are just like, would be like, oh, great. Yeah, it's a load of women. That's amazing that this person is kind of calling that out. Whereas I'm like, shouldn't even need, like, why are we pointing out that they're women? Just say that they're people being amazing at stuff. But that's because there's something in me that goes, something needs to change about how women are viewed. And
well, if you've got to point it out, it means that they're coming from a lower perspective anyway.
Yeah. So
that's one way of dealing with it. I mean,
yeah. So I think again that comes back to the whole, how are you growing yourself? Because I'm now noticing more and more of my internal things and going, right, is that something I need to notice and change, or is it something that I need to notice and then keep doing? So again, it just knowing myself and having more and more emotional intelligence around those things is hopefully the best thing I can be doing about that, and talking to as many people with different views on stuff as possible to me. So someone said to me their book list, they looked back at all the books they'd read the previous year and realised that they were all showing up in quite specific kind of demographic groups, or a lot of people that were similar to them. So they made this conscious decision to read books written by people that they knew they clearly disagreed with, or who looked completely different from them, or who definitely had a completely different worldview from them, in order to provoke their thinking about everything. Because otherwise they're just more and more learning sameness.
That's an interesting point that you make. I mean, I love that from that perspective. From my side of things, it's one of those things. One of my business partners from Iran, and learning about the Persian culture has been fascinating, and it's helped me grow significantly, because it's just so very different from what I grew up with, and I grew up with I think a fairly broad background, but just this whole different culture that I hadn't experienced. And I love that they've taken the view of going, okay, I'll take the opposite side to see how that expands my level of thinking, and I find that really refreshing that that's happening, because I think when we put ourselves in the other person's shoes, we learn so much more, rather than just stick with our own view and say that's how the world is. It's refreshing to hear that. From that, so we've talked for a little while now. We probably need to wind up. If you were to sum up what you think is a framework for being manly, especially when you look at from your boy's perspective, if we're going to put that in a nutshell, how would we do that? How would you do that?
So I think, again, it's so complex that I can hear almost myself saying to them, there are roles and responsibilities that I would love for you to take on, and to feel like this would be a great thing for me to show up like this. And yet I don't want them to ever feel like they have to do something because everyone else is telling them that that's what they should be doing because of who they are. And I guess so that just maybe brings us back to hopefully me embedding in them as much as you can find out about what is core to who you are and what you really believe in and what you want to be doing. And yes, half of that might feel like a pipe dream, and you're not going to make it all play out exactly how you wanted it to. You're still going to have to do hard stuff and make decisions and kind of toe the line when you don't want to, but to not let everyone kind of cross your values and shape you into a person that you don't want to be, then I would hope that they would be growing into people who, are fully enjoying life and yet still being the person that everyone else describes in a really positive way and wants to be around. So not being the person that's so internally involved in sorting out their own stuff that no one else wants to be around, but knowing enough and pursuing it enough that you're as good a individual as you are a person in the community is I think what I would be aiming for them.
I love that.
I equally, because of my job as a coach, like I'm so up for them challenging me on everything and all of it, and I'm expecting a lot of telling off down the line.
I love that. That's awesome. I love that comment of don't be stopped into being a person you don't want to be. I love that comment. That's awesome. Be who you want to be. Catherine, it has been absolutely fabulous talking with you. So many different insights, and I love the insights from the female perspective of what is manly, because there's a lot there to draw from, and a lot to learn from. So thank you very much for sharing. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you for being on the show.
Thanks. It's been great to be here.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.